Words West, Voices of Young Pioneers, written by Ginger Wadsworth. Lucy Ann Henderson was surprised to learn that she was moving to Oregon. She was at boarding school in Liberty, Missouri, when in the spring of 1846 she wrote these words. "My father came for me and took me out of school to my deep regret. When I got home, my parents told me we were moving to Oregon. When Father lost his farm, he decided to go where he could have all the land he wanted for the taking." Now at that time, the legal head of each family was a man. Women and children had little, if any, voice in the decision-making. Most wives feared the journey west, far from churches, schools, and relatives. But they knew that without a husband or sons around to help, they couldn't run the farm or support themselves. 10-year-old William Thompson clearly remembered a spring afternoon in 1852 when he wrote these words. "A gentleman came to our house, and after dinner he and Father rode all over the farm. The next morning they rode to the county seat. Returning in the evening, my father announced that our farm was sold." The Thompson family began to prepare for the 6-month-long trip. Nearly everything was homespun, including clothing. For families, boughten cloth was too expensive and not readily available until after the Civil War. William recalled that the first wool was carded and spun into thread for the old wooden loom. That alone took 2 full weeks. Then it was woven into cloth. Almost every day that spring, William heard the crank of the loom. A family of 4 needed about 40 yards of wool and linen cloth. For the William Thompson family, the cloth was fashioned into clothing to last for the year after we should reach our goal far out on the Pacific shores. Mothers and daughters cut and fit dresses, as well as shirts and pants for the men and boys. It took a long time because every single piece of clothing was stitched by hand. The sewing machine wouldn't become common until the late 1860s. The women stitched underclothing for boys, men, women, and girls, and then the families would also knit shawls, socks, mittens, and caps for winter. The Scott family decided they would move to Oregon in the year of 1852. 13-year-old Kit Scott, one of 9 children in her family, wrote about this. "I watched the fingers of women and girls working all winter, providing bedding, blankets, stockings, sunbonnets, hickory shirts, and gingham aprons, that the family might be outfitted for this trip. Ah, the tears that fell upon these new clothes, fashioned by trembling fingers by the flaring light of tallow candles, the heartaches that were stitched and knitted and woven into them throughout the brief winter afternoon." During the final days, families packed and repacked their belongings. Children brought dolls, slingshots, a pouch of glittering marbles, anything that was special but small. Food staples took up the most space in the wagon. Even so, a few women packed their best dishes in wooden crates filled with sawdust. They crammed trunks with good clothes and a handful of books, such as the family Bible. Farmers packed tools and seeds. Tradesmen brought their tools. Sometimes a loom, a dresser, a gold-framed mirror, or, believe it or not, even a piano to fit inside the wagon, with all their handmade quilts used as packing material. The sorting of what to keep and what to leave behind went on all the way till the last day. There just wasn't room for everything. Friends and relatives who were staying behind inherited dishes, furniture, and other treasures. Suddenly, though, the long winter was over. It was time to head to one of the several jumping-off points along the winding Missouri River. For many families, it might take about a month to go 300 or 400 miles by wagon from a farmer town to one of the starting-off points. Suddenly, it was time to begin. 13-year-old Kit, one of 6 daughters in the large Skit family, wrote her memories of leaving home in a journal. She wrote that everyone, relatives, elderly grandparents, friends, townspeople, and schoolmates, hugged and cried, knowing they would never see the departing family again. The Scott family had 5 wagons painted green and yellow with white canvas covers and filled with food, bedding, clothing, and everything else the family might need. After a quick breakfast on April morning, the family climbed into their wagons, and this is what Kit wrote. The word was given. The sluggish oxen started, and the journey of more than 2,000 miles was begun. Of moving wagons and of whips, of men walking beside the wagons with a forced show of indifference, though now and then the back of a brawny hand was drawn hurriedly over the eyes, of silently weeping women and sobbing children, of an aged grandfather standing at his gate as the wagons filed past, one trembling hand shading his eyes, the other grasping a red handkerchief, his thin gray hair blown back by the fresh breezes, and the soft spring snowflakes falling gently around him. 16-year-old Eliza Ann Macaulay left Mount Pleasant, Iowa on an April 7, 1852 day so that she could join her father in California. She traveled with her older brother Tom, who was 22, and her sister Margaret, who was 28. Eliza Ann's mother had decided to stay home. Eliza Ann wrote these words in her little red diary. We bade adieu to home and started for the land of gold. Our outfit consists of 2 light, strong wagons drawn by oxen and cows. We have 2 saddle horses and 20 dairy cows, a good-sized tent, and a sheet iron camp stove. We have a plentiful supply of dried fruits and vegetables, also a quantity of light bread. Our clothing is light and durable. My sister and I wear short dresses and bloomers, and a pair of light calfskin top boots for wading through the mud and sand. Eliza Ann Macaulay and other immigrants traveled from cities and small farming towns to frontier towns on both sides of the Missouri River. 3/4 of them came from Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, and Missouri. April and May were the best times to start. Water was plentiful and the weather was mild, and most important, the animals were able to find green grass and the other feed they needed. Otherwise, they wouldn't have enough energy to pull the wagons. Emigrants had to reach their destinations by September or October before snows blocked the passes through the mountains. Before 1849, most families went to Independence, Missouri, which was the starting point for the Santa Fe Trail, which eventually led to California. It was a crowded town, Independence was. There were all kinds of shops that had sprung up to supply the immigrants and traders. There was a constant hammering from a dozen blacksmith shops. Oxen and horses were shod. Wagons were repaired. Some came up the river by steamboat. After 1849, St. Joseph, Missouri was the main jumping-off point for California's gold rush. With the addition of more steamboats and the building of railroads from the east, other cities farther up the river became popular. By 1852, the Council Bluffs, Iowa, Omaha, Nebraska area was the #1 departure point for all migrations. Sally Hester wrote that her family took the steamboat up the Missouri to St. Joe, as she called St. Joseph. She was excited because this was her first look at a river and of steamboats and of a big city. What an adventure it must have been for children and young adults. The jumping-off spots were lively places, especially for farm children who were not used to the bustle of city life.